Hello, I'm Mark Ellen. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of conversations David Hepworth and I have had on this podcast we started 17 years ago. Some with ourselves, others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you enjoy them and want to support us and keep it all coming and get extra entertainment, including the weekly quiz and a special event on your birthday, visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear or just like or subscribe in whatever way you prefer.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So this week, sadly, saw the death of Johnnie Walker, who had kind of been forced to retire, I suppose, from broadcasting just a few months back because he simply his breathing difficulties and his health wouldn't allow him to continue. And you and I kind of worked with Johnnie on and off over the years, I suppose, and he always seemed the embodiment of one of those people who just got obsessed with radio as a kind of teenager. And it never went away, did it? Absolutely never went away.
And obsessed with America too, I think, and which I like to really chime with me. It's funny, actually, when he died, it was very sad. It made me think that that's a voice that I'd known for, I guess, something in the region of 55 years.
That's
it's been part of my life, in and out.
That's the thing.
I really remember him as a kid, and I remember his obsession with America. And at that time, after the Beatles broke up, and I was 17 when they broke up. I changed I looked that way, and I Salinger and Mark Twain and Richard Brautigan and Bonnie and Clyde and Butch Cassidy and Woodstock and you remember, and American culture seemed the most exciting thing, and he really promoted that. There was something quite American about the way he dressed, wasn't there, Dave? Do you remember he had the kind of check shirts and he had the kind of cowboy boots, fringe jackets.
I suppose so. I never really thought of that. The fascinating thing, going back over his story, is he was clearly done an enormous favor by whoever it was at Radio Caroline, who decided that Peter Dingley, which was obviously his real name, was going to be reborn as Johnnie Walker, as in the whiskey, and it fitted perfectly, didn't it?
Brilliant
it fitted
idea.
Perfectly for the next, 60 years or more.
You can't imagine we'd be talking about a Peter Dingley now. The great Dingley. It just doesn't work. It's like
absolutely
like on the stage, isn't it? You've got to get the right one.
Yeah, and he was the embodiment of the kind of casual broadcaster. I remember when in the days of GLR, because he very much had the ups and downs of the kind of the DJ's career. It tends to happen. Everything's going fine for a DJ until some new boss comes in or something happens, and then they just clear the decks, don't they?
Yeah,
and everybody's kind of out, and they've sort of got to start again.
They want to announce their personality by a new crew, don't they?
Yeah, but anyway, Johnnie was turned up at GLR doing the lunchtime show. I think I'm right saying. And he was legendary in the place for not arriving in the studio until the news had actually started. He was so casual. That's stroll in.
Cool, so you're putting on your first record while you're taking off your jacket.
Yeah, definitely.
Hasn't sat down.
Definitely. And then, years later, I suppose in the last 7 or 8 years, I suppose, I did a load of Johnnie Walker's long players.
I remember them.
And this was because he was contracted, I think, to do a certain number of hours for Radio 2 in a year, but they didn't have slots for them all. And so the idea was, let's do a series of programs called Johnnie Walker's Long Players where we can drop these in at any point. They can put them in at bank holidays or whatever. And so he and I would just sit there and talk about, I don't know, Roxy Music or Jackson Brown or Steely Dan or whatever, incorporating loads of old interview clips from the BBC archive. And it was a very congenial way. I spent a near happy afternoon with Johnny sitting in that studio. He used to always do the same thing. When he came in, he's one of those DJs where you realize his voice was his instrument. His voice was his fortune, So the first thing you would do when he came in the studio was consult with the engineer about whether he had the right microphone. And there was a certain brand of microphone, I can't remember which it was, that he preferred. And he would always insist on this because he could hear the difference in his voice. It probably wasn't apparent to me or to many people listening at home, but to him it was enormously important. The other thing you would do,
the tones, the way people spoke.
Yeah,
John Peel particularly, just the tone of his voice, and Bob Harris, that kind of.
Oh yeah, it's his voice in voice in the end. Or so, what was it? Danny described Bob Harris's voice as being like, what do you call it? Like a dildo under 6 foot of sand or something, something bizarre like that. But anyway. The other thing Johnny used to do is he used to go and clean his teeth before he broadcast. And it was kind of ritual, just disappear, clean his teeth. And, because it was improving his instrument, that's the way he did what he did.
So that's the equivalent of him, doing scales, really, isn't it?
I suppose
sing or play a guitar or something.
I suppose it is. And, like I said, he just wanted to be on the radio. I'm sure he could have retired years ago, but no. It was like loads of these guys, like Bob Harris, like Tony Blackburn, That's what they do. And that's the great irony, is that, they all started it at the age of 19 or something as a way to avoid gainful employment and to avoid doing what their parents wanted them to do. And all ended up doing it in their 70s.
And in his case, he still managed to retain this notion of being a rebel, which I thought was quite interesting, actually, because you and I knew him, and he wasn't a wildly rebellious guy, but he kind of left various radio stations in strange circumstances, supposedly in one case because he'd said something unkind about the
Well, he did. He would shoot his mouth off occasionally, and you don't have to do a lot of that to get in trouble in radio,
No, that's true.
Because they're always just looking for an excuse to thin out the roster or something. And so we had that period where he went to the United States, didn't he? In the kind of late 70s.
He was in the States for 5 years.
And it contained. There was a period of kind of near penury, I think, in the United States. And he had to come back and pretty much start all over again.
No, he did. He went back to local radio and kind of built his way back up again.
Yeah,
now, the 80s was quite a kind of something of a wilderness, I think.
But he sold all his records. I remember having a conversation with him about records. I was like, you must have loads of stuff, because you were, working on Radio 1 in the late 60s or something. You must have got sent a copy of, I don't know, Layla or whatever. He said, I've just sold all that stuff when we went to the States, So he must have sold it at a point where the market was very low, I would imagine, for that kind of stuff, but it was just, it was just what he did. So, it's a lifetime of the microphone. It's an absolutely extraordinary thing. It's a long old career. And, he'd be fondly remembered by loads and loads of people.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So here we are in 2025, which is how many years since 1965? Is that?
God, is that?
Lose track at 60.
60? It is.
I think it is 60.
Oh, Lord.
And of course, 1965 should not go unheralded, because it was, as Richard Williams pointed out in a trenchant article some while ago that I can't remember too much detail about, it was the annus mirabilis of the Black Vinyl 7-inch 45 hit single. There's just no doubt about that.
It was, and can I just add at this point that I was looking the other day and noticed that out of the 27 records that hit the number one in America, 13 of them were from the United Kingdom. Isn't that astonishing? Obviously, Beatles and Stones, Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders' Game of Love, Freddie and the Dreamers had a number one record, I'm telling you now, Herman's Herbert's Henry VIII, Dave Clark Five's Over and Over, Pet Clark Downtown. There were others, I think. I mean, that's astonishing. There's a number one records.
I tell you what I was thinking about. It was the pop single was such a big thing in 1965. It wasn't albums; it was singles. Singles were what carried the kind of the pop music virus around the world. Didn't they?
Yeah,
it was singles. They came out 4 times a year or something.
Yeah.
3 times a year maybe. So you're always looking forward to one, and every one, it seemed, in 1965 was a revelation. And I was trying to think of a kind of parallel for the obsession with pop music in 1965, and the only thing I can think of that's a parallel today is the obsession with Premier League football. It was the same thing, you know what I mean? Premier League football just throws up novelty and controversy and argument and excitement and tragedy on an absolutely bloody daily basis.
And
there is nothing else in entertainment. Nothing
Yeah.
else in entertainment. The film business don't make me laugh. The music business don't make me laugh. The TV business don't make me laugh. Football is just,
but that's because it's just
never been a bigger thing.
It's full of incident and event on a daily basis, isn't it? I mean, really extraordinary stuff that you can.
As was pop music
Absolutely.
in 1965. Pop music in 1965 was just the same thing, because you're constantly confronted with things the like of which you'd never heard before. And I'm going to go through a few here from 1965 just to remind ourselves. January 1965, The Righteous Brothers, You've Lost That Loving Feeling.
Fantastic.
Nobody had ever heard a record before. Nobody had ever heard that sound before. And it's still absolutely extraordinary all these years later. February, the Shangri-Las, Leader of the Pack.
Incredible.
Nobody had ever heard that before.
The motorbike.
You listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, just everything about it, February, the Kinks, Tired of Waiting. Nobody had no beat group had made a record that sounded like that. That kind of droning, sound. It's the sound that you can still hear in what passes for indie rock all these years later.
Yeah.
It all comes from there. May, the Supremes, Stop in the Name of Love.
Fantastic record.
You drop that record in a wedding disco anywhere in the world now, and you will still have a load of women, holding up their
Kicking
hand
off their high heels. Yes, doing the choreography.
Distinctive Stop in the Name of Love,
Yeah.
And of course,
pointing
June.
a finger to their head when it's think it over.
Yes,
There's a whole choreography. In the name of love, you hold your heart,
And June, the Rolling Stones, Satisfaction. So the Rolling Stones suddenly, in Satisfaction, they make a record that it was the first time they'd really written a hit of their own. And it was about their new experience in the United States, a record about the United States, made for the United States.
Mostly about advertising culture, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Which they found really thrilling, and it was.
Yeah. And then July, the
Can't
Beatles,
be a man
Ticket
because he
to
doesn't
Ride.
smoke the same cigarettes as me.
Absolutely. Beatles, Ticket to Ride, the nerve to make a record like that, which is apparently what was it inspired by John Lennon going to visit his Aunt Mimi and ending up having a ticket to ride on the Isle of Wight Festival, RYDE.
That's right.
Isn't that where it came?
Yeah, it was.
And the kind
That
of the
lumpy
groove
beat as well, that extraordinary beat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just irregular.
And then in July, the Byrds Mr Tambourine Man. The whole jangle thing.
That's a sort of beginning of psychedelia, isn't it, that record? It's absolutely amazing.
I suppose so.
Yeah.
I suppose
I think
so.
it is.
And just made by a bunch of LA session men. The only member of the Byrds is on it is Roger McGuinn. The rest of it's all Hal Blaine and probably Glenn Campbell and Carol Kay and all those kind of people. And then in August, Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone,
on two sides of the record.
Was it really? Wow. Because it was certainly long, wasn't it? It was 4 minutes long, wasn't it? Which was pretty long at the time for a single. But I can remember hearing that.
Go on.
I can remember hearing that at the time. And, Bruce Springsteen later described that opening drum beat, which I think is Bobby Gregg, is it? It's not Levon Helmet. I think it's Bobby Gregg.
Yes.
He says it's like somebody's kicked open the door to your mind, And because you did listen to that record in August 1965 thinking, I've never heard the like of this before. And I will probably never hear the like of this again. Then Four Tops, I Can't Help Myself. You go to the golden age of Motown, this just exultant, incredibly excited, gospel-y sound. And then the Beach Boys, California Girls in September. And in October, Wilson Pickett's In the Midnight Hour. And at the end of the year, The Who's My Generation. Now, that's just scratching the surface of 1965. There's loads I haven't included there.
I've just got to mention two or three more because they were a complete different sound. And that was Eve of Destruction by Barry Maguire, which was a huge, huge record. Again, no one had heard anything like it. Also, the sentiment of it was so extraordinary. Papa's Got a Brand New Pig Bag, I think was that year. And those
not pig bag, Mark.
Sorry, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag.
Papa did not have a new pig bag until many years later. It was just Papa had to be satisfied with the simple bag.
The simple bag. Sorry, as a QPR supporter, I just automatically say Papa's Got a Brand New Pig Bag, which is one of the theme tunes. Sorry, yeah. And also that kind of novelty of those Herman's Hermits records. I know they're not important, but the idea that a record like I'm Henry VIII, I Am could be a number one record is extraordinary, I think. But beginning of the Lovin' Spoonful, Do You Believe in Magic? I Got You, Babe, I think was 1965. And King of the Road.
Yes, it was Sonny and Cher.
Yeah.
Sonny and Cher.
King of the Road as well.
See, King of the Road is a classic case. King of the Road, nobody had heard a record sound.
No, never.
Before. And, just that finger clicking and that kind of, that small group and that almost jazzy type of sound. The radio was, and also what I remember at the time, there weren't many records on the radio. You start to get the beginning of pirate radio. But, most of radio, the liked program as it was at that time, because it was obviously before Radio 1. Most of it was kind of orchestral, quite polite music for your mum and dad. They would play about 10 records a day. And when the records were played, the excitement was just unbearable because you think, actually, the other thing, I can remember this because it happened at the end of 1965. Wasn't the Beatles' Day Trip or We Can Work It Out released at the end of that year? I think it was. Yeah. And I can remember hearing that.
I can remember my three elder sisters and me, we would take it in turns to stay by the radio all day and shout out if a particular record came on. And we'd all run from wherever we were and gather around the radio and listen to it because you just couldn't bear to miss it.
No, it's extraordinary. And the things that seem to happen with records at the time, their kind of novelty, all those records that I've recited there, their novelty equaled their kind of appeal. When a new one came out, you no longer wanted to hear the last one. The new one appeared to sounded as if it was 40% better than the one before.
But that's because there was no idea of nostalgia, was there?
Clearly there was no nostalgia.
You were only interested in the present and what the future might hold. You're not going back and go, oh, do you remember last summer we listened to so-and-so? That happened a lot later.
Oh, definitely. Many, many years later. But nobody ever said, wow, this is a swinging 60s. Isn't it exciting? They just kind of took it for granted. Nobody commented on this at all. You just thought the job of pop records is to be measurably better than the year before.
Yeah.
And they kind of were in 1965. I don't know if anybody feels that any longer. Does anybody listen to the new whoever Ed Sheeran record and think, wow, this is 30% more exciting and novel than whatever he did before? I don't think so.
I think they listen in a different way. I think they're focused on what they've decided they like, and they're probably not as receptive to stuff that's outside of that particular circle. Whereas then I think you just, whatever the sound was, Herman's Hermits, I can remember being really amazed by that sound. They weren't a group you could feel any great connection with, but just the fact that people were making those extraordinary pop records was fantastic, I think.
I suppose so. And of course, we both saw that clip this week where a recording engineer, Boffin, demonstrates why records nowadays no longer sound the way that they used to. And, how would you summarize his conclusions there?
Well, I can remember that he talked about various things which I hadn't thought of. One was that the air in studios was different. That's an amazing point. That where you recorded, the actual air, the actual ambience of the room was different. He talked about the fact that all the microphones were different and the different mics had different sounds. He talked about the type of tape that you used. Some was louder than other tape. The fact that you speeded up some of the tapes. He made the point that everybody these days is using the same instruments, which they are.
Yeah.
They're the instruments that are available in whatever technology you've got. They weren't the particular guitar, the particular saxophone or whatever you're using. Copy and paste was another thing, wasn't it? The fact that you could just take a block of a record and drop it in, which just obviously just wasn't happening. First time I ever became aware of that having happened, which is sometime after the event, was I, Me, Mine by the Beatles, where Phil Spector dropped in a bit to make the 1 minute, 26 seconds or whatever it was he had seem a bit longer. And then auto pitch and auto tuning, those things that just iron out voices and take out all the idiosyncrasies and just make them sound the same. And if you add all those things up, you can see why things sound very, very similar a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's also, it's not just sound. If you look in the world of published material, printed material, things look the same for the same reasons. People are using the same tools in the same way, whereas used to kind of respond to the human hand and the idiosyncrasies thereof. We're using machines now. I know all the arguments about, well, machines are only as good as the people who use them, but there is a kind of intrinsic drive towards uniformity about all those things, which is pretty much unavoidable, and so I'm not sure that anybody feels that the music of this year is better than the music of last year. Not in the same way, because in 1965, the innovations were kind of obvious. They were audible. They were clear to anybody. Nobody had ever heard the use of that kind of instrument. With Byrds Mr Tambourine Man, we still talk about that whole jangle tradition of music, which all goes back to that one record in 1965. It's pretty extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. What do you think changed it then? Why do you think that the level of kind of innovation and change slowed down? Was it because there was more money and bigger budgets, and therefore people took longer to make records?
No, I don't think it was to do with that. I think it kept going at a kind of extraordinary pace until about 1972. And then people, as you said, most people used to put out 2 albums a year or whatever in the 60s. If they made albums, they put out 2 a year. Then started 72, 73, they start doing 1 a year and then touring. And you've got overdubbing and multi-tracking and all these things, all the machinery of second guessing comes in, doesn't it? Most of those records we've gone through that list. We're just made on a day.
Yeah, they could be made in a day, precisely.
On a day. They came into the studio. This is what you're doing. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going to take the best take and we're going to put that out, Whereas later on, people they make records defensively, I think, rather than making records offensively. They're trying to hold on to whatever reputation they've achieved rather than just do something that establishes that reputation in the first place, But it's, I've bored for Britain on the subject of this.
Which is very similar to the film industry, isn't it? No, it's much easier to stick to a formula that you think people like than try something that is risky and it might not work and it will, undermine your standing.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
Now's as good an opportunity as any to remind people that if they want to do their bit to keeping this valuable cultural and entertainment endeavour in the public space, they can decide to be a Patreon supporter. And do you know how they can do that, Mark?
I do know, but you're going to have to remind anybody.
I'll remind you, just in case it slipped your mind. You can go to patreon.com/word in your ear and find out at what level you might care to be involved. And if you get involved at the top level, you could be joining us, like our special guest this week, Andrew Slattery, on the occasion of his birthday, to throw a log on the smouldering fire that is Word in Your Ear. Good morning, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Well, and happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you very much.
How was it celebrated?
It was celebrated with I went out for dinner with family, so there was a meal, and then there was copious amounts of cake.
Oh, good.
So it was all good. Actually, I know we're not in a visual medium, but I did get two gifts that I thought might be of interest to you.
All right,
both.
go on.
One of which is this Lego record player.
A Lego
record player, fantastic.
So a couple of friends got me that. It's a turntable.
Do you have a Lego 2p piece to put on the tone arm to weigh it down?
Now I know what that reference is, because back when I was a kid, we had to put a little 2p on the
absolutely. Yeah.
The other thing I got, which is I think you will both approve of, also Lego, but it's the Jaws set.
Oh my God!
Orca with the shark and the three characters.
That's a brilliant thing.
But I know that's a favourite of you both, because you were enthusing about it before.
Oh, we love the film. We love the film. Never get tired of the film. Well, the film is one of those things that if I go through a room where it's on, I just end up perching on the edge of the sofa. Then I slide down to the sofa, and you find me an hour and a half later.
2.5 hours later.
Yeah.
We're going to need a bigger boat, etc.
Yeah. So, Andrew, you have a log to throw on the fire, as I mentioned. What is it?
It occurred to me, we recently had the Beatles 64 documentary, which dropped, and I was at best disappointed, at worst frustrated by it. And it occurred to me that I didn't quite see the point of it. And it occurred to me watching it that much as I love seeing old footage of the Beatles, and, obviously no one's going to argue with that, I kind of thought this, do we really need this documentary in as much as it's not really telling us anything new? And I thought, well, high-profile documentaries that turn up on Netflix or Disney or the other main platforms, I thought, wouldn't it be great if some of the lesser observed acts got something equally high-profile? And I thought, who could you nominate? A couple of acts, regardless of their success or fame, what acts would you like to see get that level of high-profile documentary?
Go ahead, you go first.
Well, I thought of two, and they're both coming off books that I read this year, both of which were featured on your own podcast. The first one I thought was Randy Newman. I'd love to see a documentary on Randy Newman, because I think, you start off with the kind of, if you like, quiet, introspective stuff, and then you grow into the soundtracks, and then you've obviously got the Toy Story thing. And I just think it would be a lovely way to showcase the breadth and scope of his material. I kind of like the idea of it. Now, some could argue that there isn't enough there in his story to warrant it, but that's why I'm throwing it out there, because it's my nomination. It doesn't matter if there's not necessarily enough there. And the other one I thought of was Jim Gordon. I thought would make a terrific topic. And a bit like what you were saying recently about the Craig Brown approach, and that when you're doing something like that, there has to be a sort of a beginning, middle, and crucially an end. Like poor old Jim Gordon, there is a very definite end to that.
Yeah.
So, but I also like the idea that you could showcase, because when I was reading Joel Selvin's book, probably a bit like yourselves, it sent me scurrying back to the records to listen to all the stuff. And you just realize how incredible he was. And a bit like those classic albums, documentaries, they could do all that stuff and they could bring down the track and showcase the drums on Classical Gas or You're So Vain. And I just think that would be, obviously, you know, the story is heartbreaking, but I think as a kind of 90-minute documentary, I think it would be I think it'd be a really interesting topic.
Well, I don't know. I would certainly be interested in watching it. Its time has probably passed in terms of getting interviews with a lot of the protagonists. You know, there'll be quite a few of them are no longer with us. You know, and going back to your Randy Newman thing, and its time has similarly passed, really. You know, he's an elderly man now and probably doesn't feel that he wants to sit there and recount his whole career.
And but also that story is about music almost entirely, isn't it? There's no particular ups and downs in the life story that make for the drama that suits documentaries.
Yeah, maybe not. But and also he's just not a... He's not a big hero, is he? Except to people like you and me, Andrew. You know, not a lot of people, think about Randy Newman an awful lot. And what these documentaries tend to be about is, you know, particularly the kind of Netflix, Disney template. You know, it's just celebrations of brands, aren't they? And they all start the same. They all start with a load of slightly more famous faces, Bono or Noel Gallagher or whatever, saying this person was amazing, you know. And what they're mainly about is archive footage interspersed with current famous names saying nothing very illuminating about them. That's, you know, and you mentioned the Beatles thing, Get Back. It was just a rare exception because there's this gold material that had sat in a vault for 50 years or however long and was suddenly brought into the light of day and was absolutely magical. That doesn't apply to many things, really, you know.
What's your theory, Dave, that you were saying this morning, which is brilliant, about the idea that those documentaries are made really for, is it the male members of the family?
Well, yeah, if you look at streaming's there, it's done in a different way. They don't care whether you watch. They care whether you know it's there. Because all they're bothered about is whether you cancel the subscription or not.
Yeah.
And I have read the theory that the reason that they pay a fortune for Seinfeld is because the presence of Seinfeld on Netflix makes a lot of people avoid cancelling. They think about cancelling and then they don't.
Well, I could always watch that on a rainy day. I may not get round to it, but it's there. It's true.
And so there must be hundreds of rock documentaries on Netflix, most of which I will never watch. But it sort of doesn't matter because you know that they're there. And when they look at their whole marketing plan, it's what appeals to the young females in the house, what appeals to the old blokes in the house or whatever. And it tends to be rock documentaries, like sports documentaries, tend to do that kind of thing. And it seems to me that there's no interest on the part of the streamers in making these things any better than they need to be. They're really not bothered at all. As long as we've got Bono at the beginning saying this person is absolutely amazing, we've done the job. You know, it's amazing when you think how much money has been thrown at music documentaries in the last 10 years and how little really memorable material has come out of it.
Yeah.
You know,
Which is it's fatuous also, because if you concentrated on making a documentary that really, really appealed to the hardcore of people who wanted to see that documentary, you'd come up with something that's very satisfying, but only satisfying for a small number of people. What they try and do is to broaden the appeal by, as you say, by having a Bono or having a Noel Gallagher or someone who's often manifestly unqualified to say anything new or interesting, but just is a name.
Yeah,
it's pointless.
I suppose partly my thinking was the fact that there are a lot of very good documentaries have come out that maybe didn't get that exposure. Like, there was a really good Linda Ronstadt documentary a couple of years ago, which turned up this year on BBC Two.
Right.
Probably due to licensing or whatever. You can't buy it on DVD or Blu-ray over here. And then there was a Judy Sill documentary came out last year. And if you look up the trailer on YouTube, most of the comments are, how can I see this? Can you get this?
I bet. No, I bet.
Do you know what I mean?
I can well believe that. I can well believe that. There is Denny Tedesco, who is the son of Tommy Tedesco, who was the guitar player in the Wrecking Crew in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s. He made the film The Wrecking Crew with the cooperation of everybody, Glenn Campbell, Brian Wilson, all these people. Because he wanted to get interviews with these guys before they died, frankly. And he did. And he made a fantastically good film. And then spent 5 years trying to get the music cleared to get it released. Because it doesn't matter what Brian Wilson tells you. Yes, it's fine to use Good Vibrations. Good Vibrations will probably be owned by some bank.
Yeah, it's not his decision.
It's not his decision as to whether that music is going to be licensed. No, I agree, and this is why the best source of these kind of documentaries is YouTube, as ever, isn't it? If you get there before the cease and desist order comes in there. I tell you, the one that I always recommend, which you may be able to find on YouTube. And if it's a cold, overcast day in Dublin, this is a good way to pass your afternoon. There's a wonderful documentary about Status Quo made about a tour of Scotland.
That's a fantastic. I've seen that.
In the 80s or the 90s.
Or really at the lowest point, and it's really touching. It's really moving.
It's really touching.
They know that the big glory years are behind them.
But it tells you more about what it's like to be in that kind of long-serving rock band than any number of kind of high, big budget celebrations. But now I can see what you're talking about with the Judy Sill cases and the Linda Ronstadts and all those things. You have to hope at some point they turn up in the Internet Archive or some place like that and make sure that they're being preserved. But look, thanks for that thought, Andrew, and for sharing that with the Word in Your Ear faithful. And may your birthday week continue in the style to which you're accustomed.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.